Most families are ordinary. The ones you're about to meet are not even close. From parents who broke world records to bodies that defied science, these families shocked millions and refused to be forgotten. These are the most unusual families ever caught on camera. Let's dive in. Number 13. The dwarf family that survived Hitler together. A Jewish family arrived at Auschwitz in 1944, and 7 of them had dwarfism. In that place, most families were torn apart in minutes, but the Ovitz family was noticed almost immediately by Josef Mengele, the Nazi doctor obsessed with bodies he could study. That attention was terrifying. It also became the strange reason they were not killed right away. Before the war, the Ovitz family came from Transylvania, in what is now Romania. Their father, Shimson Isaac Ovitz, also had dwarfism. He had 10 children, and 7 were born with dwarfism too. In a poor village that could have trapped them in ridicule and struggle, but the family found a way to survive. They became performers. They called themselves the Lilliput Troupe and traveled across Central Europe singing, playing music, and entertaining crowds. Their average height relatives helped behind the scenes. Then everything changed. In May 1944, 12 members of the family were deported to Auschwitz. At the camp, their mix of dwarf and average height relatives caught Mengele's eye. He was already known for cruel experiments on twins, children, and people with bodies he considered unusual. To him, the Ovitz family was not a family. They were a collection of bodies he wanted to control. That is why they were pulled away from immediate death. But what followed was not mercy. They were forced through repeated examinations and experiments. Doctors took blood again and again. They extracted bone marrow. They pulled teeth and hair. They poured hot and cold water into their ears. They measured, photographed, inspected, and humiliated them like objects instead of people. Mengele sometimes gave them better food and kept them in slightly better conditions than many other prisoners, but that was not kindness. He was keeping his specimens alive. The Ovitz family survived until Auschwitz was liberated in January 1945. After the war, they eventually moved to Israel in 1949. For a while, they even performed again. Number 12, the family with lobster hands. For generations, the Stiles family carried a condition that made their hands and feet look claw-like. Crowds called them the lobster family. But the most shocking part was not the way their bodies looked. It was how that condition became a business, a prison, and eventually part of a murder story. The condition is called ectrodactyly. The middle fingers or toes are missing or split, so the hands or feet can look like claws. In the Stiles family, this trait did not appear once and disappear. It kept passing through the family line for generations. By the time Grady Stiles Jr. became famous, the family had already been tied to sideshow performance for years. His father had performed as the Lobster Man, and Grady was brought into the same world when he was still a child. He later became known as Lobster Boy. Grady's condition affected both his hands and feet so severely that he could not walk like most people. He moved by using his arms and upper body strength. That alone made people stare, and in the carnival world, staring could be turned into money. So the family turned public attention into a living. Relatives with the same condition became part of the act. Crowds paid to see them. Posters turned their bodies into a selling point. Then the story turned much darker. Grady was not just known for his condition. Family members later described him as violent and abusive at home. And because he could not walk normally, many people underestimated him. But his upper body was strong, and the people closest to him said they lived in fear. In 1978, Grady shot and killed his daughter, Donna's fiancé. He reportedly did not want them to marry. He was convicted of third-degree murder, but he did not go to prison. Because of his condition and health problems, officials said no prison was properly equipped to care for him. Instead, he received probation. Years later, the violence came back on him. After more abuse and threats, his wife, Mary Teresa, and her son became involved in a plan to kill him. In 1992, Grady was shot inside his trailer in Gibsonton, Florida, a town known for carnival workers. Number 11, the family that walked on all fours. In rural Turkey, several adult siblings from one family moved on all fours, not crawling like toddlers, not pretending for attention. They used their hands and feet to move through daily life. And when the world saw them, people could barely believe it was real. They were part of the Ulis family, a large family from southern Turkey. The family had many children, but only some of the siblings moved this way. Others walked normally. That detail made the story even stranger. Because this was not a family habit or a cultural choice. Something had affected only a few of them. When cameras eventually reached them, the story spread fast. People rushed to explain it in the wildest way possible. Some headlines called it reverse evolution, as if the family had somehow gone backward in human history. But that was wrong. The Ula siblings were not turning into an earlier form of human. Researchers later linked cases like theirs to problems with balance, movement, and brain development. The cerebellum, the part of the brain that helps control coordination, was affected. Some studies also connected similar cases to changes in a gene called VLDLR. The simple version is this: standing and walking on two legs was extremely hard for the affected siblings, so their bodies found another way to move. They placed their palms flat on the ground and used a bear crawl style of movement to get around. And that is where the story becomes sadder. Their lives became a public spectacle. Cameras came, scientists studied them, strangers compared them to animals. But behind all that attention were real people who had grown up with very little therapy, very little support, and almost no tools that could have helped them move differently when they were young. Number 10. The Blue People of Kentucky. In the hills of eastern Kentucky, one family became known by a name that sounded completely made up, the Blue People of Kentucky. But this was not paint, not a trick, and not some mountain legend. Some members of the Fugate family really did have skin that looked blue. The story began in the early 1800s when Martin Fugate settled near Troublesome Creek in eastern Kentucky. He married a woman named Elizabeth Smith, and neither of them knew they both carried the same rare hidden trait. When they started having children, several were said to have blue-looking skin. At first, that sounds impossible, but the Fugates lived in a remote area with few roads and very few outsiders. Families in that part of Kentucky often married within the same small circle. Names like Fugate, Smith, Combs, Ritchie, and Stacy kept crossing through the same family lines. And because the trait was hidden, unless both parents passed it on, it kept appearing again and again. The condition behind it was called hereditary methemoglobinemia. Their blood did not carry oxygen in the usual way. Too much of their normal red blood pigment changed into another form that made the blood look darker. That darker blood gave the skin a blue cast, sometimes strong enough to be seen from head to toe. What made the Fugates even more unusual was that many of them were not as sick as people expected. Their color could look alarming, but some lived long lives and worked like other people in the area. The mystery finally started to break in the 1960s, when a doctor named Madison Cawein studied members of the family. Two blue-skinned siblings, Rachel and Patrick Ritchie, became part of the case. Cawein realized what was happening in their blood and treated them with methylene blue. The results sounded almost unbelievable. Within minutes, their skin began turning pink. Years later, the family story appeared again when Benjamin Stacy was born in 1975 with purplish blue skin. Doctors were alarmed, but his relatives recognized the old family trait right away. As he grew older, most of the color faded, though his lips and fingers could still turn blue when he was cold or upset. Number 9. The world's hairiest family. In one Mexican family, several relatives were born with so much hair on their faces and bodies that the world came to know them as the hairiest family on Earth. They are known as the Gomez-Etseves family. Some of the best-known members are Victor Larry Gomez, Gabriel Danny Ramos Gomez, Luisa Lilia de Lira Aceves, and Jesus Manuel Fajardo Aceves. Together, they belong to a larger family of 19 people across 5 generations who share the same unusual condition. The condition is called congenital generalized hypertrichosis. It causes unusual hair growth from birth. In the men of the Gomez-Aceves family, thick hair has covered almost the entire body, apart from the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. In the women, the hair is usually lighter, but still very visible. But the real story is not just the hair, it is what came with it. For this family, being different was impossible to hide. Their faces were the first thing people saw, and many people reacted before they ever got to know them. They were stared at, mocked, and called wolf people. Children in the family had to grow up with strangers, treating them like something strange, instead of ordinary people with ordinary lives. Larry Gomez became one of the most famous members of the family. He was known as the Wolfman. Instead of hiding forever, he turned the attention into work. He became a performer, an acrobat, a trapeze artist, and a juggler. He later appeared in the film Water for Elephants. Number 8, the youngest confirmed mother in history. Lena Medina was only 5 years old when doctors discovered she was pregnant. Not 16, not 13, 5. She was still a little girl when her family took her to doctors in Peru because her stomach was growing, and they feared something was badly wrong. At first, her parents thought it might be a tumor. That was the only explanation that seemed to make sense. A child that young should not have been carrying a baby. But after doctors examined her, the truth was far more shocking than anything her family expected. Lena was several months pregnant. The case was so unbelievable that many people thought it had to be a lie. But doctors documented it. Medical images showed the baby inside her. Her pregnancy was examined, recorded, and later became one of the most disturbing medical cases ever known. The reason it was even physically possible was a rare condition called precocious puberty. In simple terms, her body had developed far earlier than it should have. Doctors reported that Lena had signs of puberty when she was still extremely young. That made pregnancy possible in her body, even though she was still a child in every other way. On May 14, 1939, Lena gave birth by C-section. She was 5 years, 7 months, and 21 days old. The surgery was needed because her body was far too small for a normal delivery. The baby was a boy, and he was named Gerardo. He was born healthy. The darkest part is that the father of the baby was never confirmed. Lena's father was arrested at one point, but he was released because there was not enough evidence. Lena never publicly identified who had impregnated her. Gerardo grew up believing Lena was his sister, before later learning she was his mother. He lived into adulthood and died at 40. Lena later chose a quiet private life and stayed away from the attention around her case. Number 7. The surviving nonuplets. Halima. Cisse gave birth to 9 babies at once. Not triplets, not even octuplets, 9 babies. And the part that made the world stop was not just that they were born, it was that all 9 survived. Halima was from Mali, and during her pregnancy, doctors first believed she was carrying 7 babies. That was already rare enough to make her pregnancy dangerous. Carrying that many babies can put huge pressure on the mother's body, and the babies are often born too early and too small. So, Halima was moved to specialist care in Casablanca, Morocco, where doctors could handle a birth this risky. Then came the shock. She was not carrying 7 babies, she was carrying 9. On May 4th, 2021, Halima delivered the babies by C-section at the Ayan Borja clinic in Casablanca. They were born at 30 weeks, which means they arrived far earlier than a normal pregnancy. Each baby was tiny, weighing between about 1.1 and 2.2 pounds. There were 5 girls and 4 boys. Their birth immediately became a medical event because surviving nonuplets were almost unheard of. Before Halima, the record for the most surviving babies from one birth belonged to Nadia Suleiman, better known as Octomom, who gave birth to 8 surviving babies in 2009. Halima's family went one baby further. Her children became the first known set of 9 babies from one birth to survive. But the delivery was only the beginning. These babies were premature, fragile, and needed serious medical care. They spent months in Morocco with doctors watching them closely. Incubators, feeding, breathing support, and constant checks became part of their early life. Halima's husband, Abdelkader Arbi, also had their older daughter to care for, while the family's entire world suddenly revolved around keeping 9 newborns alive. After 19 months in Morocco, the family finally returned home to Mali. Number 6. The woman who became a mother in her 70s. Daljinder Kaur became a first-time mother when she was already in her 70s. At an age when most people are watching their grandchildren grow up, she was holding her first child in her arms. For Daljinder and her husband, Mohinder Singh Gill, this was not a sudden dream. It was something they had waited for almost their entire married life. They had been married for about 46 years, without a child. For decades, that empty space followed them everywhere. In many communities, not having children can bring pressure, pity, and painful comments from other people. For Daljinder, motherhood was not about attention or making history. She had spent most of her life wanting a baby of her own, and for years, it seemed like that chance had passed her by. Then, long after most people would have stopped hoping, the couple turned to fertility treatment. They went through IVF, which simply means doctors help create an embryo outside the body, then place it inside the womb. The process was not quick. Daljinder and her husband reportedly spent about 2 years going through treatment at a clinic in Haryana, India. There were failed attempts before the pregnancy finally worked. By then, her husband was already around 79. Daljinder's exact age was harder to confirm because she did not have a birth certificate, but reports described her as being in her 70s. In April 2016, Daljinder gave birth to a baby boy. They named him Arman, a name often linked with wish or desire. And for this couple, that name carried the whole story. But the birth did not only bring joy, it also started a serious debate. Some people saw it as a miracle, a final chance for a woman who had waited all her life. Others worried about the risks of pregnancy at that age, and about what life would be like for a child whose parents were already elderly. Number 5. The pregnant man. In 2008, the world saw something many people had never seen before: a pregnant man. His name was Thomas Beatty.
For Thomas Beatty, since he had his first child, we're catching up with him at his home in Phoenix.
He had a beard, lived as a man, was legally recognized as male, and yet his body was visibly carrying a baby. The image spread everywhere. Some people were shocked, some were confused, some were angry. But behind all the noise was a simple family story. Thomas and his wife Nancy wanted a child. Thomas Beatty is a transgender man. He had transitioned years earlier and was living legally as male. He had taken testosterone and had surgery on his chest, but he had kept the reproductive organs that made pregnancy possible. Nancy could not carry a pregnancy because doctors had removed her uterus, so Thomas decided to carry the child himself. He stopped taking testosterone and became pregnant through artificial insemination using donor sperm. Thomas said wanting a child was not a male desire or a female desire. It was a human desire. He still saw himself as a man. Pregnancy did not change that for him. It was simply the way he and Nancy could bring a baby into their family. On June 29, 2008, Thomas gave birth to a healthy baby girl in Oregon. And the story did not end there. He and Nancy later had more children, all carried by Thomas. Number 4. The family that vanished into the Siberian wilderness. In 1978, Soviet geologists flying over the Siberian taiga saw something that should not have been there. Far below, deep in the forest, there was a small clearing, a rough garden, and signs of human life more than 150 miles from the nearest settlement. When they went down to investigate, they found a family that had been almost completely cut off from the world for more than 40 years. They were the Lykovs. Karp Lykov was an old believer, part of a religious group that had faced pressure and persecution for generations. In the 1930s, after Soviet pressure and violence reached his family, Karp took his wife, Akulina, and their 2 children, Savin and Natalia, and fled deeper into the wilderness. They kept moving until ordinary life disappeared behind them. 2 more children, Dmitry and Agafia, were born out there in the taiga. That meant they grew up without cities, schools, shops, roads, radios, or almost any contact with outsiders. The modern world was something their parents could only describe from memory. Their life was brutally simple. They lived in a rough wooden hut. They grew potatoes and rye. They gathered berries, roots, and anything the forest could give them. Their clothes were patched again and again, until there was almost nothing left to patch. They wrote with sharpened birch sticks dipped in honeysuckle juice. Their old prayer books became their school, their history, and their link to everything they had left behind. But survival in that forest was brutal. In 1960, frost destroyed their crops. The next winter became a nightmare. The family ate bark, straw, roots, and leather just to stay alive. Akulina starved to death in 1961 after giving what little food remained to her children. When the geologists finally reached them, the Lykovs were scared, cautious, and overwhelmed. They had missed World War II. They did not know about the moon landing. Dmitry, who had never known normal civilization, became fascinated by tools and machines. But even then, the family did not simply return to the outside world. Their faith, fear, and habits were too deeply tied to the forest. Then tragedy followed. In 1981, Savin and Natalia died. Dmitry died of pneumonia. Karp died in 1988. Agafia stayed behind in the taiga. Number 3. The 5 sisters behind glass. 5 baby girls were born so tiny that no one expected all of them to survive. Then they became so famous that millions of strangers came to watch them grow up. What began as a miracle birth in Canada slowly turned into one of the most disturbing childhood stories of the 20th century. On May 28, 1934, in rural Ontario, Elzire Dionne gave birth to 5 identical daughters: Yvonne, Annette, Cécile, Émilie, and Marie. They were born almost 2 months early inside a poor farmhouse near Corbeil. Together, they weighed only 13 pounds, 6 ounces. The smallest was barely over 1 pound. At first, survival itself seemed impossible, but all 5 lived. That alone made the Dionne sisters a global sensation. During the Great Depression, when people were desperate for hope, 5 tiny babies surviving against the odds felt like a miracle. Newspapers followed them. Crowds became obsessed with them. Their faces started appearing everywhere. Then the story changed. Their father had already faced pressure from promoters who wanted to display the babies. Soon after, the Ontario government stepped in and claimed it was protecting the girls from exploitation. But the protection became another kind of trap. The sisters were taken from their parents and made wards of the government. They were placed in a special nursery across the road from their family home. That place became known as Quintland. It was supposed to be a safe medical space. Instead, it turned into a tourist attraction. Visitors came by the thousands to watch the girls through viewing areas and glass. At scheduled times, nurses brought them out to play while strangers stared. The sisters were not just children anymore. They had become a public event. Over the years, more than 3 million people visited Quintland. Roads improved, souvenir shops appeared. Their faces were used in ads, films, and products. Money moved all around them, but the girls themselves had no real control over their own lives. In 1943, they were returned to their family, but going home did not erase what had happened. Later, the sisters spoke about loneliness, emotional damage, and the pain of growing up like property instead of children. Decades later, the surviving sisters pushed for recognition, an apology, and compensation. Number 2, the children trapped inside their own home. A 17-year-old girl climbed out of a window in Paris, California, holding a cell phone she barely knew how to use. She called 911, and when police reached the house, they found one of the most shocking family abuse cases in modern America. From the outside, David and Louise Turpin looked like parents of a large, unusual family. They had 13 children. They took staged family photos. They went on trips. They renewed their wedding vows in public. To strangers, it could look strange, but still happy. Inside the home, it was something else entirely. The children were living in fear, hunger, and control. When police entered the house, they found siblings ranging from small children to adults. Some were so malnourished that officers could hardly tell how old they were. Several had been denied proper food, medical care, hygiene, and education. Some had been chained or restrained. The older children were adults by age, but they had been kept from living like adults. The parents had not only hurt their children, they had trapped an entire family's life inside one house. The control reached into almost everything. Food was used as punishment. Basic needs were denied. The children were kept away from normal school life, friends, and freedom outside. They did not grow up with the ordinary things most people take for granted. Their parents controlled where they went, what they ate, what they knew, and how the outside world saw them. David and Louise Turpin later pleaded guilty to felony charges, including torture, false imprisonment, cruelty to dependent adults, and child cruelty. They were sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, but freedom did not fix everything overnight. The children had escaped the house, but they still had to rebuild lives they had never been allowed to live. Some later faced serious problems even after rescue, including abuse in foster care. Number 1, the family that couldn't feel pain. Letizia Marsili was skiing in the Italian Alps when she fell hard enough to break her shoulder. For most people, that would have ended the day immediately. But Letizia felt the pain for a short moment, brushed it off, and kept skiing for about 18 more miles. Only the next day did an X-ray show what had really happened. Her shoulder was broken. That sounds like one strange accident until you learn it ran through her family. Several members of the Marsili family in Italy shared the same unusual problem. They could feel pain at first, but it faded away far too quickly. A burn, a cut, a bad bruise. Even a broken bone could hurt for a moment, then almost vanish from their minds. That made injuries easy to ignore and dangerous to miss. They were not completely numb. Their bodies still sent warning signals. The problem was that the warning did not last long enough to protect them. At first, it almost sounds like a gift. No long-term pain after a fall, no lasting pain from a burn, no injury stopping you the way it stops everyone else. But pain is not just suffering. Pain is the body's alarm system. It tells you to pull your hand away, stop walking, rest your leg, or get help before the damage gets worse. For the Marsili family, that alarm went quiet too soon. Letizia herself grew up thinking she was just unusually strong and stubborn because pain never controlled her the way it controlled other people. Scientists later studied the family across several generations and gave the condition a name, Marsili syndrome. They traced it to a rare change in a gene called ZFHX2. One tiny difference in their family's genetic code changed the way their bodies handled pain. That discovery made the Marsili family important to researchers, because understanding them could one day help people who live with constant pain. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.